Aquarius. You may have noticed, some old feelings never really left the way you once thought they did. They just step back a little, quieter, softer, and then, at some point, they return. Not through words, but through signals that are hard to name. A name suddenly crossing your mind, a memory that no longer feels as heavy as before, or simply the quiet sense that someone might still be thinking of you in their own way. And what's different now is, this time, you're not rushing to find an answer. You just stand there, watching, noticing, and gently wondering, is what's returning really a person? Or is it a part of you that's finally ready to be seen in a different light? And maybe this is how it begins, with something so subtle you almost miss it. Some things don't enter your life with a loud sound. They don't need a name. They don't need confirmation. They arrive like a soft breeze brushing past your shoulder, just enough to make you pause, but not enough to explain what just happened. Aquarius lately, you may have felt something like that. A quiet shift, something changing, very gently, but enough to make you think, like walking through a completely ordinary day, nothing unusual, and suddenly you think of someone. Not in a rush, not like before, when emotions would flood in all at once. Just a passing thought. So light. And yet, it lingers longer than you expect. Or maybe it's the way you revisit an old memory and realize it no longer feels heavy. You begin to notice. You don't need to understand everything right away. You don't need to figure out exactly what is happening. There's just a part of you starting to soften. And somehow, that softness makes you more aware, because some changes don't begin outside of you. They begin in the way you feel the world. A gaze becomes gentler, a thought less rigid. A moment of stillness no longer feels uncomfortable. And then you start to realize some things that once felt finished were only waiting for a different version of you to see them again. Not to go back to the past, but to understand it in a more grounded, more grown way. This feeling isn't loud. It doesn't ask you to act right away. It simply exists. Very light, very real, and close enough that you can't fully ignore it. You might find yourself asking, does this mean something? And maybe the answer isn't in figuring it out right away. Maybe it lives in allowing yourself to feel it without rushing to name it. Because sometimes, the smallest signals are how life reaches you in the most honest way. And if you listen long enough, not with your mind, but with that quiet place inside you, you'll begin to notice what is truly moving closer to you. There are people who step out of your life in a way that feels so final on the outside, and yet they leave behind a space on the inside that's hard to name. Not the kind of absence that feels loud, but a quiet presence, as if they're still there, just no longer standing beside you. Aquarius, you may have once believed that everything had come to an end, that when someone leaves, the story leaves with them. But over time, you begin to notice. Not everything that leaves is truly gone. Some connections no longer show up in actions, but they remain in the way you remember someone. It's in the way a name can still touch something inside you, even after so much time has passed without it being spoken. They may have chosen distance, not because there were no feelings, but because they didn't yet know how to stay. They may have chosen silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because they didn't know where to begin. And maybe they were simply walking through a path of their own, a place where they needed to understand themselves before they could understand someone else. That doesn't make things right or wrong. It just makes the story feel more human. Because sometimes leaving is not the end of a sentence. It's a pause, a space for each person to listen to themselves again. And in that quiet space, you don't completely disappear from them. Maybe not every day, maybe not in the way you once expected, but at some point, in the middle of very ordinary moments, they still think of you. Not as something broken that needs fixing, but as a memory that once truly mattered. And what's interesting is, as you grow, you begin to see them through a different lens, less judgment, less urgency to define what everything meant. You stop trying to figure out why things happened the way they did, and instead, you gently accept that some people enter your life not to stay forever, but to leave behind something deep enough that one day, When you remember it, it's no longer pain, but understanding. And maybe from that understanding, something very quietly begins to change. And then, after all those quiet pauses, something begins to shift. Not fast, not clear from the very beginning. Just, you start to feel a very subtle movement in the way things touch you. You don't need anyone to say it out loud. No confirmation, no long conversation to explain everything. These things don't arrive in loud ways. They come through the smallest details. A glance that lingers just a little longer than usual. A presence that shows up at the right moment without trying to draw attention. Or, sometimes, just the way someone returns without the urgency they once carried. No more need to prove anything. No more pressure to understand everything all at once. Just a softer return. And what's different is, you don't see them the same way anymore. You don't react right away. You're no longer pulled back into the emotions that once drained you. Instead, you observe more, you listen more. And somewhere very still inside you, you realize you've changed. And maybe because of that, what's happening now feels different too. You remember them, but it doesn't feel heavy. You think about the past, but there's no longer a need to fix it or go back and make it right. It's just a quiet reflection. Calm, clear. As if you're standing at just the right distance to see the whole picture without being pulled into every small detail. And from that distance, the feeling begins to take shape. No longer scattered pieces, no longer unanswered questions, but something slowly becoming easier to understand. Not through logic, but through feeling. You don't need to name it right away. You don't need to rush into deciding whether this is an opportunity or just a passing moment. Because sometimes, the value of a feeling is not in where it leads, but in how it helps you see yourself more clearly. And maybe, what matters most is not that someone is moving closer to you, but the way you're receiving it. More gently, more slowly, and more honestly. As if, for the first time in a long while, you're no longer trying to control the story. You're simply there, allowing things to unfold in their own way. And within that natural flow, you begin to see more clearly what is real, what is only an echo, and what is slowly becoming a new possibility. And as things begin to feel a little clearer, there's something you slowly come to understand. Not every return carries the same meaning. Aquarius, some reunions are not meant to continue the old story, but to look back at it through a different light. No more expectations like before. No more need to prove who was right, who was wrong. Just two people who have walked their own separate paths and somehow find themselves standing at the same intersection again. Some returns are only there to help you understand why things couldn't continue back then. Not for regret, not for blame, but so that a part of you can gently come to a close. You no longer carry the questions. You no longer sit with the weight of what if. There's only a quiet kind of clarity, that everything unfolded the way it needed to. And then, there are other kinds of returns, softer, slower, more real, no longer rushed emotions, no longer promises made before they were understood. Just a presence that isn't trying to become something too big, just there, close enough for you to notice, distant enough that you don't feel pulled in. And somehow, and that balance is what makes it meaningful. You begin to see what's returning may not be the old version of someone, but a different version, a little more grounded, a little less guarded, and maybe a little more sincere in their own way. But more importantly, you're not who you used to be either. You no longer see love as something you have to hold on to at all costs. You no longer try to keep what no longer fits. You've learned to listen to your own feelings before listening to anyone else. And because of that, if something is returning, you don't rush to call it a second chance. You simply see it as a possibility to understand, a possibility to feel, a possibility to choose again. But this time, with more clarity, because not every journey needs to return to where it began in order to feel complete. Sometimes, the wholeness comes from continuing forward while carrying an understanding you didn't have before. And if something truly is beginning again, it won't look like it used to. It doesn't need to, because what has changed within you is already quietly shaping the way this story moves forward. And then, as the story begins to move again, in the softest ways, you start to realize something. The center of all this is no longer about them. It's no longer about what they're thinking, what they might do, or whether they'll come back at all. Because at some point, you begin to return to yourself. Aquarius, it may be true. They are thinking of you. They may even be moving a little closer in their own way. More slowly, more quietly, with a certain hesitation. But what makes you pause isn't their movement. It's how you feel when you notice it. Do you feel a sense of calm settling inside you? Or is there still a small part of you that tightens, as if trying to protect itself from what's uncertain? There are moments when we think we're waiting for someone, but in truth, we're waiting for ourselves, to feel safe enough to stop guarding. And that is a profound shift. You begin to listen to yourself more closely, not through rushed questions like, is this worth trying again? But through something much more honest. Am I still who I used to be? Do I truly need this? Or am I just used to it? And sometimes the answers don't arrive right away. They show up in the way you respond to small things, in the way you're no longer carried away by intense emotions like before, in the way you can pause, take a breath, and not feel the need to decide immediately. That isn't hesitation. If that's growth, because before, you may have opened the door simply because something felt familiar. But now, you've learned to look deeper within yourself, to understand that not every feeling that returns is meant to be kept. And not every opportunity needs to be taken right away. Some things reappear just to show you how far you've come. You're no longer someone who gets pulled back into the past so easily. You're no longer searching for answers from someone else to confirm your worth. You're beginning to stand more firmly in your own feelings. And that changes everything. Because when you're grounded, you no longer need someone to return to complete the story. You only need them to show up with sincerity. And you'll know whether it truly aligns with you or not. So, if someone is moving closer, you'll let it happen. But don't forget to turn inward, not to question, but to understand. Because sometimes, someone's return isn't meant for you to open the door right away. It's there to help you realize you've become someone who chooses instead of simply feels. And when everything has reached this point, maybe what remains is not an answer, but the way you choose to meet it. Aquarius, if something is truly moving closer to you, a person, a feeling, or simply a memory that once felt familiar, let it come in the most natural way. No need to rush and name it. No need to decide right away whether this is a second chance or just a passing moment. Because some things, when you try to define them too early, you quietly take away their truth. Give it space. Space to arrive, space to be felt, and space for you to listen to yourself. You don't have to decide right away. You don't have to open the door just because something familiar has returned. And you don't have to close it just because you're afraid of repeating the past. You just need to be there. Slow down a little more. Be still a little longer. And be more honest with how you feel. You may begin to notice your heart doesn't respond the way it used to. No more rushing, no more being pulled in so easily. Instead, there's a quiet clarity that you have a choice. You can choose to open when you feel safe. You can choose to keep distance when it brings you peace. And sometimes, the right choice is neither opening nor closing, but allowing the door to remain still for a while, letting things answer themselves in their own way. Because what truly belongs to you won't need urgency. It will find its way to stay naturally, without force, without strain, just aligned. And one day when your heart feels light enough, no longer pulled by the past, no longer pushed by expectation, you'll know, not through logic, but through a quiet clarity within you, whether that door should open or simply close with a soft smile. Some journeys don't require distance to become change. Sometimes all it takes is for you to pause long enough to truly hear yourself. And in that stillness, you may realize what you've been searching for has already begun to shift within you, long before you noticed. And whatever is returning or leaving, what matters most is how you choose to stay with yourself. Because when you are grounded, every door in your life, whether it opens or closes, leads you to a place that feels more like peace.